Hello, everyone. Thank you for checking out this special episode of Really Dicey. This is Manny, and I'm here with.
Hi, everybody. It's Jim Johnson. I am the project manager and line editor for the Star Trek Adventures RPG, published by Modiphius Entertainment these last 7 years, going on 8 years strong now. And I am super excited to be here talking with Manny once again. Thank you again for having me on your show. I just love what you're doing. Really Dicey keeps me engaged week in and week out. I have it on the background all the time when I'm working on products or working on books or doing my day job or whatever. I just love all the cool stuff that you've got going on. So thanks for your support and all you do for the industry, but also, thanks for having me on once again. I can't believe you keep inviting me back. So I'm just grateful to be here, man.
Star Trek Adventures. Whenever a role player comes up to me and asks me about wanting to try a space adventure, I always say Star Trek Adventures. You should really check it out. The 2D20 system is great. The lore is fantastic. And each book, honestly, if you never played a game, each book has so much lore. It's almost like a resource book, in my opinion. If I want to know something about the Delta Quadrant, I'll just take the Delta Quadrant Sourcebook, look through it, like, oh yeah, this happened here, here, and there, and there. It's a wonderful. You've done a great job of incorporating so much information in such, in these books. It's a great job overall. So yes,
Thank you.
So yes, I'm a big fan as well. And today we're going to talk about the Lower Deck campaign guide for Star Trek Adventures. Now, previously we talked more about the ideas behind the book, the tone, some of the messages, the balance between humor and serious storytelling. But this is going to be a chapter overview of the book, which is now out on PDF, and I believe it'll be sometime down the line. It'll be available in print. Am I correct about that?
Pretty much, yeah. So it's available for pre-order right now. The print edition is available for pre-order right now, and just as a special benefit for anybody who pre-orders the print edition, you get the PDF right away. You get it sent to your email, and the print book is scheduled to be out August 3rd. So we're planning to release this at Gen Con, and then worldwide at the same time. UK, Europe, Canada, wherever you may be, wherever your distributors may be. Hopefully they've got the books by then. But the US release is planned to be at Gen Con. And the same day it goes live at Gen Con is when we'll also sell the PDF on the web stores and also on Drive-Thru RPG. So if you just want the PDF, you got to wait just a little bit longer. But if you're interested in pre-ordering the print edition, you can do that right now and get the PDF right away. It'll just be sent over the transom through the email, digital files and stuff. And it's not a draft PDF. It's not a playtest PDF. It's the final version that went to print. In fact, actually, there's a couple of minor changes that we were able to make to the PDF after it had already gone to print. So it's the latest and greatest. So you should feel comfortable that the PDF you're getting is the real deal.
Mm. And I'll put a link for that and for our previous interview discussion about it in the description below.
Cool.
So yes, let's get started.
Yeah.
Chapter 1, State of the Galaxy. I'm curious about this section. When I've been watching the series, I can't seem in my mind to pinpoint where this takes place. It seems like it's right after Next Generation, after Voyager. But again, it's a series not to be taken too seriously. It's a more comedy than anything. So what can you tell us about this section?
Yeah, sure thing. So Lower Decks, and I think they don't necessarily come right out and say it in the dialogue, right? They if you're familiar with the Stardate process, right? The Stardates take place after Next Gen, after Nemesis, etc. So you got to do a little finagling with the math to understand that Lower Decks is set after the Dominion War, after Nemesis, but before Picard, right? So it's that 2381 time frame. Nemesis has already happened, and so there's this gap of time between the end of Nemesis and the start of Picard. That was kind of this, like, what's going on in that 20 to 30 year gap. Well, I guess 20 years of time before the Hobus supernova blows up, Romulus and stuff. And so Lower Decks is like right in that zone right there. And so what this first chapter does is it really kind of sets the stage, like what is happening in the galaxy in that span of time, right? We've just had the Dominion War, we've just had Insurrection, we've just had Nemesis, we got things going on with the Romulans. The things in Picard haven't happened yet, with the synths and the Soong androids and all that other stuff that happens that you see in Picard. But then you got Lower Decks coming in, and there's this new focus on support operations and what the Cerritos is up to, the other California class ships, etc. But this was the first opportunity we've really had to do a lengthy kind of like essay slash discussion of like what's the state of the galaxy after the Dominion War, right? Voyager's come back, the Dominion War is over, we've had Nemesis, like all those events that we know and love from like the Legacy series that we didn't know what would happen next. I mean, certainly we had tons of novels and comic books that kind of continued that story in a beta canon fashion. But like what was happening like in actual canon, like there's not really a lot of huge amount of information, right? So what we did is, as with some of our other books, including the Discovery Campaign Guide, what we did is we just took the totality of what we know from canon, and we just tried to like put that together into a narrative so that players and game masters could kind of understand, okay, if I want to run a game set after Nemesis, but before Picard, somewhere in that 20-year time frame, which Lower Decks happens to span a little bit of, like what's happening with the Klingons, what's happening with the Romulans, what's happening with the Orions, et cetera, what's happening with the Federation, right? Now that the Federation is post-war, what are they doing? Are they going back to exploration? Are they hunkering down for another fight with somebody? What's the Borg up to, et cetera, et cetera? And so based on what we knew from the Legacy series and what we can infer from the first couple seasons of Lower Decks, because Lower Decks is amazing in that in like 23-minute episodes, they can pack a lot of information into those 24 minutes, right? There's just so much stuff going on, not just the references to the original series, into the animated series, and to Next Gen, but they're also referencing stuff that happened in the Dominion War and the Nemesis and the movies. There's just so much stuff and so much world building too. It's really great. So there's just a wealth of material there. And I've always felt that our job as the curators of the current incarnation of the role-playing game is like game masters and players need lots of information in their head in order to build a campaign and to build characters and to build a story that fits. Like if you want to fit in the canon anyway, like you want to fit in the canon and then go do your own thing, that's super cool. But we're trying to establish what's that baseline, what's that canon baseline, plus some extrapolations of what we think is happening and what could probably happen. Understanding, of course, that all of it could be invalidated by canon. Like they could make an episode of, Lower Decks or Strange New Worlds or something that would time travel, and that would completely invalidate everything we've written. But that's just the nature of the beast. That's just the risk of doing a licensed game, is that we don't have any control over what they do or don't do. Like, hopefully, I would like to think that some of the developers or producers and writers and stuff are actually reading our stuff and enjoying it, and maybe applying some of the best of stuff. I mean, who knows, right? I don't know. I know some of the people over there, but none of them have really come out to say that they've actually read our stuff, so that's okay. But anyway, so this whole chapter 1, it's all about the state of the galaxy. It's all about what's happening in the Federation, what's happening in the Klingon Empire, what's happening in the Romulan Empire before the whole supernova, like what's happening politically. Because like if you remember in Nemesis, right, the whole Romulan Senate got wiped out by Shinzon. There's a power vacuum, especially once he gets killed. So like what happens? Like what does the Romulan Empire do? Do the Klingons come in and say, hey, you're weak, we're going to take advantage of that? Or do they try to like prop themselves up? We try to give you some ideas around that. And then, interestingly, the people over creating Lower Decks, Mike McMahon and his team, like they decided to make the Pakleds a significant threat, right? So it's like, who saw that coming? Certainly not me. But we wanted to pay some attention to that, because obviously the first couple seasons the Pakleds are absolutely a serious threat. So we put a few pages in here about the Pakleds, what they are, what they're working on, what they're doing, what's their plan, etc. And so we put some stuff in there about how to use the Pakleds as a credible threat, because at least as far as we see in Lower Decks, they are a credible threat. Maybe not to the degree that the Klingons or the Romulans are, but certainly they are an absolute wild card. Just because of the things that you see on screen. Like they can put, they somehow they have the ingenuity to put all kinds of different technology together and make it work long enough to be a threat. Like it might backfire on them at some point, but for a while, those clump ships are working and they're effective and they're dangerous. So we want to pay some attention to the Pakleds. And then, of course, like I said, with Lower Decks, there's a huge amount of world building, and they created a lot of new cultures and new worlds, and we just wanted to make sure that we paid a little bit of attention to each of the notable ones, like the Orions, the Drukmani, the Pakleds, of course, and there's a few other ones. And then we wrap up the chapter with short descriptions of some of the key worlds that we've seen in the first couple episodes. Of course, Star Trek is all about exploring strange new worlds and new lives and new civilizations. And to their credit, Lower Decks continues that tradition, and it shows us, dozens of new worlds and civilizations in those first couple of seasons, first 3 seasons at least. And we wanted to pay attention to at least a couple of them as candidates that game masters and players could drop into their campaigns or reference in their campaigns, and just bring it all, that whole continuity together, and put some of these planets right there up alongside Trill and Beta Z and Ferenginar and so on and so forth, and make these actual important planets if you want them to be. So chapter 1 really all about world building, all about the state of the Federation. It's not really focused at all on Lower Decks as a series. I mean, certainly we have some of the key characters presenting these little chapters. So Boimler and Mariner and Shax and a couple of the other ones. The chapters are written from their perspective, right? So we're kind of presenting their point of view and presenting the information at the same time. There's, as usual with all of our products, there's tons of sidebars in here about either different things that are going on or providing color to the text. And as a unique thing for this book, we had the opportunity to have Badgie make some commentary as well. Of course, Badgie, he was in a couple episodes of the show. He's this supposedly helpful little app program that Rutherford creates. But of course, true to the Lower Decks, things go horribly wrong, and it's a horrible, evil, devastating creature. But then it all gets better, of course. But anyway, so Badgie has this kind of like fun little mix of super helpful but also super menacing, and we try to get that Badgie tone into most of these sidebars. We have Badgie providing a lot of sidebars and just some color commentary about some of the different topics that are on in here. So if you follow those along, it'll just give you another perspective on the Romulans, the Klingons, the Pakleds, etc. And hopefully it'll be something fun for people to read. And Manny, I'll tell you, I've been going on forever about this chapter, so I'm going to pause. What other questions do you have about chapter 1? I
think chapter 8 has more of what I'm going to ask you for, so I'm going to hold back on that.
Mm-hmm.
So let's move down to chapter 2 then. Let's talk about Starfleet support operations. I'm curious to know what this section is and how it compares to chapter 3.
Yeah. So this chapter 2 is all about Starfleet support. So if if you're watching the show, you'll know that the California class and the Cerritos, they're really responsible for doing all the necessary grunt work behind the scenes after the frontline ships like the Enterprise D do their thing. They do their first contacts, they do the important missions. Because the Federation's a bureaucracy, because Starfleet's a bureaucracy, like someone's got to come in and do the dirty work. Someone's got to do the negotiations and the second contacts, and the Corps of Engineers. They got to build the bridges. They got to not just socially but also physically. So all that necessary grunt work, that's all part of Starfleet support operations. And to date, we haven't really gone into a huge amount of detail on support operations. We covered a lot of it, or actually we covered some of it in the operations book and a little bit in the core book, and we drop in little bits and pieces here and there across some of our other books. But because Starfleet support operations was such an important part of the series, we thought it really deserved a fairly lengthy discussion. So again, this is a chapter that's not really focused on the series itself. What we're doing is we're extrapolating stuff from the series that you see, and we're just filling in the blanks as best we can in order to give players and game masters a really strong foundation where if you want to run your own Starfleet support operations kind of game on your own California class or your own Obena class or your Parliament, whatever, there's enough material in here that will give you a really good baseline for like, okay, how does Starfleet support operations work? How can I create a campaign around this? And we just provide a lot of tools and advice and lore, like you were saying at the top of the show. We just provided just a ton of lore in here about how Starfleet works, how Starfleet support operations works, and like how can you run a game and a ship and a crew that has that as their background. And we talk about different ships. We talk about some of the different contact missions that you can get involved with, not just first contact, but second contact. Talking about diplomatic missions, talking about the rights of representatives, helping to develop economic relations. Even though the Federation technically doesn't have money, there's still some system of barter and trade that has to operate, because certainly some of the new cultures that you encounter might have money, and there needs to be sort of equivalent trade deal to go on. So how does that work? How do you make trade agreements with a entity that doesn't have money, right? There's got to be some other way to get around it. So we provide some advice around that. Some ideas and suggestions on developing cultural relationships and scientific relationships, especially because if you think about it, like the Federation just has a wealth of knowledge about science and technology. What are the guidelines about how sharing that with a new culture and new civilization? presumably they're warp capable, but like how do you like, do you share too much? Do you overshare? Do you undershare? Like, what's the right balance point? And that's stuff that I'm sure the Federation and Starfleet has to think about, so that you don't accidentally unbalance a sector of space or something, right? So again, just a wealth of information, lore, ideas, tools. Ultimately, tools. This is a toolbox, just like all of our other products that we provide. And then later on in the chapter, this is still chapter 2. We talk about the some of the jobs, and well, not so much in this chapter. We do it more in chapter 3. But we talk about like duty shifts, but from the lower decks point of view. So like you're a junior officer, how does the junior officer experience on the ship differ from your senior staff, right? Like obviously the senior staff that we know and love from Next Generation had a very different in ship life experience than your lower deckers, like Tendi and Mariner. They have a different life because they have different jobs and expectations and duties and stuff. So we try to touch on that, give you some ideas. And then, we just found a way to get some other interesting stuff in here, partly based on what we've seen on the show, right? Like in season 1, of course, spoiler alert, if you haven't watched it yet, please go watch it. These episodes are only 20 minutes long. So, but, in season 1, one of the senior officers apparently dies, right? So they die in the line of duty. And in lower decks, at least, they kind of pass it off a little bit because it's a comedy show predominantly. But in like Next Gen, there's a couple of instances where officers die in the line of duty, and it's pretty heavy, right? Like now, of course, Next Gen, because it was a syndicated show, they couldn't linger on that over episode to episode. I think DS9 did that a little bit better, where you saw the impact of character death or character death and how it impacts the people involved. And so we talked a little bit about that. Now, again, we didn't go into it too heavy because, of course, Lower Decks is a comedy show. We wanted to keep the book pretty light. But I thought it was appropriate. Some of this is important topics that characters need to be aware of, and you might experience in your game, right? You might experience the death of a beloved NPC or even main character once in a while, depending on what your campaign's doing. And so, like, how do Starfleet officers deal with death? Like, how do they deal with a loved one or a dear companion or a dear workmate or whatever, going into the line of, or not even necessarily line of battle, but just doing their duty and getting killed, right? Like, space is dangerous and is ready to kill you at a moment's notice without, if you're not careful. And you're beaming down to planets of all kinds of strange and exotic creatures and botany and biology and phenomena, and there's like radiation of all kinds. There's no shortage of danger out there in space, right? And I'm confident on a regular basis any given ship is going to experience at least a handful of deaths here and there. So how do you want to handle that in your game? Like, do you kind of like, not really focus on it and just keep going on? Or could that have a potential real impact on your characters? I think in my gaming experience, some of my groups have experienced the loss of significant characters. Like there's been a couple instances where players said, I'm not enjoying this character anymore. I want to kill him off or kill her off and play something new. Let's take that as an opportunity to do it like a really meaningful episode where they do die in the line of duty, and then there's the consequences of that. Like, how does that impact the other characters? And that was really awesomely mature role playing on the part of my group, and it gave us a chance to explore things that we maybe didn't expect to explore in Star Trek. I mean, we were all comfortable with it. We all talked about it beforehand, and which I think you should absolutely do. I think you should really try to have a session 0, or at least a conversation with your group if you are thinking about killing off one of your main characters. Like, have a talk about that just to see like how far is the group wanting to go. Like, some people may not want to discuss that kind of stuff in game, either because of real life situations or just because they're not comfortable with it. So we give you some advice and some tools about how to maybe think about that. But at the same time, that particular character in season 1 who got apparently killed came back in season 2 and didn't really explain why, right? And they kind of made some great humor out of that. And we thought that was a good opportunity to provide some random tables in here. So we did kind of stretch the bounds of this book a little bit, where we added more random tables in this book than we maybe normally do in some of our other products, just to have some fun with it, and just to give players and game masters the chance to just get a little goofy. Because honestly, if you watch the show, sometimes some of the things that happen in the show are literally completely random, like completely out of the blue. They're going about their day, and all of a sudden there's this squid creature destroying the ready room, and you're like, oh, where did this come from? This is totally random. But that's just that's space screwing with you, right? And so we thought, well, why not throw a random table in here about possible ways your senior officer could have come back to life, and just roll d20, get to pick something random off the table if you don't like the result. But we just try to pack it just full of fun, weird stuff based on Star Trek, based on Lower Decks, things that we've seen plausibly happen on the show that could possibly happen in your game. So we provide some advice around that. We do talk a little bit about the value of a ship's counselor, especially in relation to a character death or just trauma in general. Trauma, even though it's Lower Decks and they kind of ha-ha a little bit with Dr. Miglimo, therapy is really important and it's healthy and it's good to get therapy. And I have to think that ship's counselors in Starfleet are probably busy all the time, because like any given day, people are probably dealing with stress or PTSD or some sort of mental, not just mental trauma, but physical trauma too. But I have to think, just like the things we see the crews on the shows deal with in and day, or week after week, all these different episodes, like how does that not impact you, right? Without some sort of outlet or help, like McCoy was serving that role on the original Enterprise, and of course you got Troy, and you've got other counselors who can help you. So we try to talk a little bit about counseling and like how that's a benefit. I think we went into more detail on counselors in the Sciences book, but we just provided a few more thoughts here as well.
I really like how there's this different tools for game masters to either serious or comedy, almost like the balance of the two. And I have to say, I really like that this book is taking an emphasis on the culture of being a lower deck person, because I think one of the things I struggle sometimes when I do a Star Trek game is that everyone wants to be the chief engineer or the chief officer of some sort right away, and that's fine, but I feel like there's some other great adventures that you don't have to be in charge of. I think there's some other fun stuff, but there's not a lot of resources for that, except for maybe Lower Decks and maybe a few episodes here and there from different Star Trek series. They'll spotlight someone from a different, outside the main cast or something. So it's good that I'm really glad that this is available. Because this will help me as a game master to even if I don't play the Lower Decks universe or the campaign itself, but I could take that and put it into any campaign I can.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we really tried to be intentional. I mean, obviously, we wanted to focus the book predominantly on the Lower Decks because that's what the series is focused on. But we wanted to provide enough information here too that even if you're not necessarily a Lower Decks officer, you might be a lieutenant, even a lieutenant commander. Maybe you're not on the senior staff, but still got an important role in the ship. There's still stuff in this book that is relevant to you. Like one example is the whole discussion we have around families. Like as we see in Next Generation, Starfleet has gotten to the point where their ships are on these long duration deep space missions, right? And they've figured out that go with the Starfleet officer, and so that they're not separated for whatever, because that could create a significant hardship, right? And I think modern militaries can't do that to the same degree, where you might be on tour for a couple of years and then you come back and you go with your family for 6 months and you might go on another tour or whatever. But we've seen in Star Trek, especially Next Gen DS9, families on board your ship are a thing, which can be both a blessing and a curse, right? Because we've seen plenty of episodes and instances where family members get into harm's way and there's drama around that, which is always great. Like that's a great grist for drama, right? Like how many times was Jake in trouble that Ben Sisko had to go rescue him, or how many times was Wesley or Beverly in trouble and they had to go help each other out, whatever. So like having a family member on the ship, instant source of subplots, instant sort of drama. It's an instant thread that a game master can pull on to make some easy scenes happen with that character, because you can just do all kinds of stuff with that, right? So we talk about families a little bit. But also we talk a bit about like reassignments and transfers. Like if you think about being a lower decks officer, you are in the early stages of your career, and if you as a player want to role play that character through their career as they're advancing from ensign to lieutenant JG to lieutenant, so on and so forth, there is a chance that they will transfer from ship to ship to improve their skills, to take on new opportunities. Maybe a job offering comes up that they can't get on their current ship, so they have to transfer to another ship. So like, how does that even work, right? And that's something that I don't think any Star Trek RPG has really covered in much detail up to this point. Where like you're thinking about your character, your career. Like we were almost joking that this book is kind of like the Starfleet HR book, because like there's so much HR, human resources stuff in here about like thinking about your career. What's your career path? What's your career goals? Talk to your supervisor, talk to your career counselor, all this stuff. It's like, how many players are going to come into this going like, am I really doing that in a game? And it's like, well, yeah, because like, I've seen this with a lot of gamers that are playing Star Trek Adventures, and even in my own campaign, I'll admit this is how most of my campaigns work, is that the players come into it with, they may not know exactly where they want their character to grow to, but they know they want their character to grow and develop and get promoted and take on more responsibilities. Or in the case of a couple of players, like maybe they don't know Star Trek all that well, and they'll start off as a flight officer, or maybe they'll start off as a security, ensign or lieutenant JG or something, and they're just getting a feel for it in a role that is pretty straightforward. Like if you're the flight controller, you're flying the ship, you're flying a shuttle. There's not a whole lot of ambiguity about that role, right? If you're a security officer, you're there to protect the crew, you're there to protect the captain. You go on away teams, you're there to protect the away team and help investigate, watch out for the bad guys. You might do a little pew pew, you might get into little fisticuffs, whatever. But you have a pretty established role. And if you're new to the game and you're new to the franchise, then that gives you a chance to have some time to do something meaningful, but also learn some of the other stuff. And as we've seen in Star Trek, especially Lower Decks, because it's done a great job with it. But also, like if you think about jury, Starfleet officers have the ability to go from department to department and try different things and try new things and gradually be promoted. Like we see that one episode with Rutherford. He tried out engineering, then he tried out security, then he tried out command, and then he went back to engineering. And it's like Starfleet's like, you know what? We want the best people in the role that's going to best complement their skills and talents. We want to challenge you, of course, because we want you to grow. But like if you have a certain skill set and you're being wasted in this role, then we want to move you to a role that you're going to succeed in and flourish in, right? And so hopefully you've got a good commanding officer, and hopefully you've got a good like department head or whatever who will recognize that. Like I think Dr. Ta'ana noticed that with Tendi, right? She realized that Tendi was kind of not fulfilling her full potential as a medical officer. So she said, maybe I'm going to transfer you over to, or maybe you should transfer over to sciences, and here's an opportunity for you. And that's, as a role player, as a gamer, like that's a great opportunity to do something different and to recognize, okay, you've been playing this game for a while, Tendi. I think you're leaning more towards science than you are toward medical. Would you like to, switch your role into a science field and like, kind of informally level up into something different? And that just gives the player a new opportunity to do some different things, gives the character a new opportunity to do some different things, and puts you on a different career trajectory that you might not have thought of before. And there's all kinds of possibilities around that, right? So anyway, all that being said, is like all those different tools that we've just been talking about, or I guess that I've been talking about, we throw them into the book here just to give more stuff for players and game masters to think about, in terms of the fact that you're not just creating a character with one dimension, right? Like they don't just do one thing good. They don't have a niche that they're stuck in forever, right? Like Starfleet officers are super competent, super capable, can do a lot of things right out the box. Like even coming out of the core book, if you create a starting Starfleet character, you can do a lot of stuff. You may not do everything great, but you can do a lot of stuff pretty well. And by adding this additional advice on top of that, now you can really start to play with it and start, shifting yourself around a little bit. Try some reassignments, try some transfers, try some different roles. Expand your skill set, and then if you as a player need it, expand your knowledge of Star Trek by just trying to do different things, and then you'll continue to grow and just see where your character goes from there. And that's organic, right? That's organic growth, and it's not really like career development wise, or character development wise, in terms of the game, it's not tied to like gaining a certain amount of experience points or looking for the next level up or the next what's the next carrot that I can get, what's the next feat or perk or spell set slot that I can get. It's not mechanical in that respect. It's more organic. It's like, how's your character growing and changing? Like, what do you want to do? How are your values changing? How your focus is changing? Maybe you're naturally progressing from medical to science, or from engineering to command. Like maybe you're a junior department head and you take on more responsibility and you become your department chief. And then you're like, oh, I really like this. Maybe I want to take some command courses, within the context of role playing in the game, and do like what Jordy did, or even Troy. Right? We saw Counselor Troy. Intentionally, they called it out on the show that she was taking like command training courses in that episode of Disaster. Like all of a sudden, she's the commanding officer of the Enterprise for a little while there, because she was the senior officer on the bridge, and Roe and other officers were looking to her for leadership. And what a great opportunity as a gamer to be put into a situation that's kind of new and different for your character, but you can build that into your character, into your role playing, right? And then grow from there. And that's something that you can't really quantify with like the static experience points or experience perks or whatever, all the different various experience systems that are out there, right? So it's just something different, and hopefully folks will really dig the tools that we dropped in here, just to see what can you do with that in your campaigns. So anyway, I'll stop there. Yeah, go ahead, Manny.
So it sounds like chapter 2 mainly is the a general Star Trek guide for anyone who wants to have to understand the lower deck, how lower decks, how ranking works, I guess you could say, in Star Treks. So with chapter 3, the lower decks, it's much more the show feel, how to get the show feel into your game.
Yeah, to some extent, yeah. So chapter 2 is talking about, here's how support operations work, and then we get into a little bit about like reassignments and transfers and that kind of stuff. And then chapter 3, and I don't mean this in a negative sense, but chapter 3, we really hit you over the head with the lower decks experience, right? This is the chapter that's really more focused on what we see on the show, in terms of the fact that the 4 main characters are all lower deckers. They have a very specific life experience on the ship where they're doing like the menial tasks and they're doing the grunt work, and they're not responsible for the resolution of the mission. Like, right, the senior officers are the ones, figuring out the meta plot, right? But in the meantime, the 4 main characters are like doing their thing, and somehow it all ties together into the main plot. Like where the traditionally on a lot of Star Trek, like the main characters are doing the A plot, and sometimes the supporting characters are doing the B plot. The lower decks kind of reverses that, to where the main focus is on the supporting characters doing the B plot, and the A plot's happening kind of in the background, right? Captain Freeman and Ransom and everybody are doing the main thing, and sometimes Boimler and Tendi and Rutherford and Mariner kind of like overlap the main plot to some extent, but they're still doing their own thing, and they're doing their own thing, and it all comes together at the end. But so chapter 3 is really all about, what is life like as a lower decks officer? Like, what are you expecting? What's your career like? What are you responsible for? How do you advance? How do you improve yourself? Again, we were getting into the Starfleet HR a little bit. We talk about career path. We talk about career path and transfers, and developing your social skills, developing your education, and your looking for accommodations, different ways that you can present yourself in order to be promotable, right? You have to present yourself in a certain way, and certainly part of it's doing the work, but also part of it's who you know, right? And that may be uncomfortable for some people, but I think I found in my day job, not to say real life, but like in my professional career outside of gaming project management, like 85% of my career is based on the work I've done and the quality of the work I've done, but a chunk of it is also who I knew and those relationships I was able to build. And part of it's certainly luck, right? Of course, the harder you work, the luckier you get, in my opinion. And sometimes you just have to kind of like fall into the right place at the right time with the right skill set, and be able to promote from there. So we offer some guidance around that, like how do you make that work in a game, and like how serious do you want to take all this stuff, right? Because like it's still a game, and you're still there to have fun with your friends, right? You don't want to necessarily be thinking about, oh my god, here I am, my day job, I'm thinking about my career, and now I'm playing the game, and I'm thinking about my game career too. Come on, I can't get away from it, right? But it just depends on how far into the weeds you want to get with your game. And like I know, like I said, all the games I've played, all the Star Trek games I've played, over the last years, most of my players, this is where we were, right? We were really into the game. We were really into the role playing and the character building, the character development. And I think, most of us intentionally played junior officers like Lieutenant JGs and lieutenants more often than not, because we wanted that opportunity to grow and develop and to get promoted. Because I've certainly played a captain a number of times, and it's a great experience. It's a lot of fun. I really recommend everybody try playing a captain or an XO sometimes. But the rewards for your character are different, right? Because if you're playing a captain in a game, you're not going to get promoted unless you want to go into like an Admiralty style game. So if you already know that I'm playing a character that will not be promoted, you have to find your reward in different ways, right? You have to find something, some other thing in the game has to bring you joy, other than just experiencing the episode or the adventure or whatever coming up. Even commanders like XOs have a little bit of an advantage because they could theoretically get to a point where they could get offered their own command, like Riker, and maybe you spin off a new campaign with them as the captain, and maybe you quietly shuffled the captain character to a different into the background, or you just let them go, and then that captain player plays a junior officer, right? And then you rotate in, and then you get to do the whole chain over again, which is a lot of fun. But anyway, I know that a lot of groups don't do that, right? They either don't have the time or the ability to invest that much time into character development and campaign development to where you could actually see a character improving from season to season and growing in power, or not power, but growing in promotions and responsibilities and stuff, or so forth. But the potential is there, right? You could run a campaign like that if you have the time and the means and all that stuff. So anyway, with all that being said, again, this chapter really talks about that lower decks experience. Thinking about your career, thinking about your promotions, promotability, ways to think about character advancement that aren't really mechanically focused. It's really just about the role playing and the character development, thinking about milestones and like swapping out your focuses, changing some points of attributes, etc. But really, this chapter is more about the soft stuff and not the hard mechanics, because we're really getting into the role playing potential here, which some people really eat up and love, and then some people are like, no, I just want to know what the next carrot is. I want to know what perk am I going to get at my next level or whatever. Which is fine. That's certainly a great way to play games. That being said, Star Trek Adventures is not really that kind of game, right? You're not going to get that immediate reward after leveling up or whatever, like you'd see in like a computer game or other RPGs out there. There's not that level that regimented level of progression necessarily, right? So just find ways to get rewards in different ways, and hopefully we provide some tools for that here in this chapter.
Section in chapter 3, supervising characters. Mm-hmm. Is that NPCs or?
Yeah, so that's a new thing that we dropped in. So I mean, it's newish mechanics, but what it is it's basically flipping the supporting characters on the other direction. So where if you're playing a senior staff character, your supporting characters out of the core book, your supporting characters are the junior officers that give you an opportunity to play somebody else if your main character's busy doing something else, right? Like if you're playing the captain and you're on the ship, but there's cool stuff happening on the away team, maybe you go play a red shirt. You grab a supporting character, you play a red shirt, you play one of the junior foremen, or you play an engineering officer who went down to the away team or landing party. And that way you've got something to do on the ship with your main character, but you've also got something to do with your supporting character. And so the supervising characters idea here in the book flips that around. With the conceit is you're playing junior officers as your main character, and if your main character is busy doing something, and you want to play a different character, right? Create a supervising character as a supporting character who has more responsibility and is working, you know, ahead over you, like they're higher up on the food chain. And so this is a way to create that kind of character, a supporting character, but who's a senior officer as opposed to a junior officer. And I'll give credit to Al Spader. He kind of came up with this idea near the end of the development on this book. We were starting to move toward finishing up the manuscript, and he said, you know, he emailed me one day. He said, Jim, I have this crazy idea. Do we have time to write up, you know, maybe 2 pages or 3 pages about supervising characters? And he threw the pitch at me, and we talked about it. We went back and forth with it a little bit, and I was like, yeah, I think that'll work. You know, write it up. Let's see what it looks like. And I thought it was solid. I thought it was a great idea just to flip that idea of supporting characters around. And so we fit it in here, and we have the room for it and the space for it and stuff. So hopefully that'll be a nice you know, additional tool for players to think about, and game masters too. Like, you know, if maybe you do play a long-term lower decks style campaign, you know, and here's an opportunity for you to play the XO, play the captain, play the chief medical officer once in a while, even though your main characters are ensigns or lieutenant JGs or something. And the more I think about it, the more I think that maybe supervising characters might be a good way for some groups to create a captain NPC that they can share as a supporting character from time to time. Because I know that, like, one of the common threads in a lot of Star Trek Adventures discussion online is, you know, who's going to play the captain? Like, maybe nobody wants to play the captain. Nobody in the group is comfortable playing the captain. Maybe nobody feels like they have the Star Trek knowledge or or, you know, like the life leadership experience to, like, confidently play a captain, which is totally fine. And so this is a way, because, like, in my opinion, I think a captain character in Star Trek and our Star Trek RPG is wasted as an NPC, right? Because, like, you watch the show, there's so many cool situations that happen, so many dramatic moments that happen that are based on the captain making a decision or not making a decision, whatever. That players just, it's such a great dramatic opportunity for players to do cool stuff. And the more I look at these rules for supervising character, I think it would be a great way to create a captain for your game who was a supervising character, you know, effectively a supporting character, but players could kind of like test the waters and say, okay, you know, my Lieutenant JG is on the away team. Meanwhile, there's a scene on the ship. Oh, you know what? I'm going to play the captain in this scene just to see what it feels like to be the captain. Like, I got all this responsibility. I've got to make this decision. I can kind of like test the waters a little bit. Maybe they want their main character to, like, be promoted at some point. What does that mean? What does that leadership moment mean? And so this is kind of like an opportunity, you know, if you make a captain supervising character, I mean, even an XO or a department head or something, this gives certain players an opportunity to play somebody with more responsibility and get a feel for it, right? And without necessarily, you know, breaking anything or destroying anything or whatever. So I'm really curious to see what players think of this new tool, this new rule set. And I'm really curious to see just how it actually works in practice, because I think it could be really cool. It's just a matter of seeing like how, I mean, it's true with all of our books, honestly. Like, we make all these tools and then we throw it out into the ether, and then we just have to wait for the feedback. We watch the streams, and we watch the Twitch channels, and we watch the YouTube videos, and we hear the feedback on all the different social media forums and stuff. And we're just waiting to see what happens, right? And until there's a better forum for fans to tell the developers what they're actually getting out of it, you know, we just have to hope for the best. So I'm really eager to see what the response is to this new option.
Yeah, I'm starting to think of ideas myself, but I don't want to. That's a different discussion.
Understood. But you know what? I mean, that right there is mission accomplished, right? Just if we're just talking about it and ideas are percolating in your head, that's exactly what we want to do. That's why we put so much stuff into these books, because we want to just throw the maximum number of tools at people just to see what sticks, right? I mean, this is a 240-page, you know, full color book. There's a lot of stuff in this book. It's not just the series, right? So, like, I know there's some just detractors out there who are like, oh, it's got the lower decks on the cover, I'm not going to even bother because I don't like the show. It's like, okay, it's fine to not like the show, but just understand that, like, historically, the Star Trek Adventures books, we pack a lot more stuff into these books than just what's focused on the show, right? I mean, this is 240 pages of stuff. We could not possibly have written 240 pages if all we did was focus on the Lower Decks TV show itself, right? Like, I mean, there's a lot of content there, but we really try to go deeper and broader into Star Trek to really bring it all together, so that if you're playing or if you're running like an Enterprise game or an original series game, Next Gen DS9 Voyager, even future Discovery, like you can still use the vast majority of the content in this book, because there's always lower deckers. There's lower deckers everywhere, every era, every time period, every poly. Like Klingons, Pakleds, Ferengi, Romulans, they all have lower decks officers. You may not see them much on the show, but they're there, and we get hints of it. And in fact, there was one episode of Lower Decks, Wedge Douge, that showed Klingon lower decks, Pakled lower decks, Borg lower decks, even, and we pay attention to all that. In fact, that's getting into the next chapter, I think. But no, actually no. We're still in chapter 3, aren't we? We're still talking about chapter 3. So we talk about that too. It's like maybe you don't want to play a Starfleet game. We have really expanded that in like with the player's guide and the discovery book, and then now this book. We provide a lot of tools for groups that don't want to play Starfleet. Like if you want to play a Klingon game, go for it. You want to play a Pakled game, please do it. I'd love to see it. So like there's enough tools now. I think somebody could play a Lower Decks campaign for any of the major polys, even some of the supporting polys if you wanted to. You want to play a Ryan Lower Decks campaign. I think you got the tools you need to do it, or that you would want to do. I think just across the line, there's enough pieces you could pull together to make it happen. So hopefully that's really expanded the breadth of possibilities that Star Trek Adventures brings, beyond just what you see in the core book. Of course, because the core book was entirely focused on Starfleet, because that's what we see on the vast majority of the TV series, right? But with books like this, we're able to expand that quite a bit. And I think if you're a fan who's just looking at it on the surface and saying, oh, well, it's Lower Decks, it's that TV show, I don't like that TV show, I'm not even gonna look at this book, you might be missing out. Like I'll leave that to the reviewers and to the other fans to sell you on it. I can't sell you on it. It's not my job necessarily. I'm just trying to make this stuff. But I think try to have an open mind. Try to think about IDIC. Try to realize that we're providing just a ton of tools for you as a gamer, and hopefully something in here resonates enough that, like Manny was doing just a moment ago, he said the ideas were percolating. Maybe there's something random on page 85 that you'll be like, that's what I needed to run my campaign, and you're off and running. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah, and I think I mentioned this also in a previous video about Lower Decks, is that I think this book gives the okay now that you can have, I mean, Star Trek games has always been fun, but now you can have, it's almost like you can have permission not to have comedy. You can let loose a little bit of the rigidity of the Starfleet rules and the academy and everything. You could actually have some more fun trying different things, because I don't know about you, but my campaign started out a little serious, but then it becomes like anarchy toward the end, and that's okay. That's what's fun about them. And I know with trying to get new players to try out Star Trek, there's always that like, oh, is it fun? Is it exciting? For some reason, Star Trek really does have this weird like connotation that it's very serious sci-fi, and it's really good sci-fi, yes, but there's a lot of comedic wild stuff out there. I mean, some of the old Star Trek novels have some really wild concepts out there. But that could be a topic in itself. So chapter 4, science and sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Oh, science and technology. Now, the show itself, Lower Decks, I'm trying to recall if there's anything stands out to me when it comes to technology, except for like the ships. So what does this chapter have for us exactly?
Yeah, so the science and technology, we talked a little bit about, we actually go into a little bit more detail. So we touched on this on the core book and in the science book, and then in the Shackleton book even, we try to expand more possibilities, more options for like stellar phenomena, spatial anomalies, random weird stuff that can happen out in space that could, have an impact on your ship, either physically or just metaphorically. So we try to give some more ideas about some of that stuff, especially some of the stuff that we've seen in the show, like, planetoids and strange energies and just weird stuff out there in the universe that you can adapt and use to thrill or terrify your players. So we offer some advice on that. And then we talk about one of the things I'm really pleased about that we were able to fit into this book is a whole system on creating creatures, like non-player character creatures. Because like in Lower Decks, if you watched it, right, like almost every episode, there's some weird random creature looking to attack or destroy the ship or the crew, or is even threatening, but turns out to be completely docile, or looks completely docile and turns out to be hugely threatening. I love that dichotomy of like subverting expectations. And to this point, we didn't really have a place to fit this. Like we had this subsystem in the works for a while. I was like, what book are we going to put this into? It just nothing really quite fit. We didn't have enough room in Shackleton because it was just already such a huge book. It was like, well, let's hold on to it. Let's hold on to it. And then Lower Decks came along, and we're like, that's the one that if we get the Lower Decks license, we're going to put it in there. Because I think it's a great opportunity for game masters to create weird and amazing creatures, strange new worlds, new lives, new civilizations, new creatures to throw at your players. I don't want to say it's like a monster manual type of thing, but if you want to create just weird, unusual monsters, creatures, even whether they're super tiny or super gigantic, we give you a system for doing that. It all ties into everything that you've already are familiar with Star Trek Adventures in terms of talents and special rules and different defense capabilities and so forth. So in a few pages, we try to put enough meat together here to say, look, if you're a game master, you want to create some wacky, unusual creature. Here's a system that you can use, similar to what we did for creating sectors of space in the Shackleton book, where we have some random tables and some guidance on how to like put together a sector, put together planets, put together stars, etc. So you can go off and have adventures. So now this complements that to say, okay, now you've created your planets and your sectors. Now, what's living on those planets? Is it a arachnoid creature that can spit fire, or is it a flying a flying rat that has giant claws and a prehensile tail? I don't know. Whatever amazing things you can create, you can use the tools in this subject chapter to do that. So we offer a little bit of science stuff, just giving more options for things that you can do with stellar phenomena and things that are happening out in space. And then we also provide the creature generation package of tools there. So not a huge. I mean, it's only like 8 or 9 pages. It's not a huge chapter. But again, we tried to pack it as full as possible of story ideas, possibilities, tools for you to use, and you can pick. Hopefully you can look at that and just grab a couple sentences, and those sentences will inspire you to go do something amazing in your game.
And chapter 5, player options. So what does this section have available for players?
Yeah, so those who are familiar with the game know that our player options chapters, especially in like the the Quadrant books and Shackleton and the Discovery book, we always try to offer at least a handful of new species options for you to play with. If you want to play a new character, you want to play a new player character, you want a new interesting and different species than what you've seen in the core book and some of the other supplements. Here are some new life path options, right? So we present 8 new species in this, well, not new, but we present 8 species in this book that now are added to the game canon, at least, of different species that you could play. Some of them are from the canon shows, like Next Gen especially, that we've been able to bring in because Lower Decks presented characters of those species, and then some of these are also unique species to Lower Decks. Like I said, Lower Decks packs a lot of stuff into their episodes. They've introduced new worlds, new civilizations, and new species, right? And some of those species seem to fit the idea that maybe members of those civilizations would join Starfleet or contribute their talents to Starfleet. And I figured, or even if they don't join Starfleet, maybe you could be a character of that species, and you could be an advisor on a Starfleet ship, kind of like Neelix or Kira or Odo or Quark. Fortunately, as Star Trek has grown over the last 55 years, the type of characters that are on the show has grown as well, to where you've got Starfleet officers working side by side with non-Starfleet officers. You got civilians getting involved. You got all kinds of different roles and possibilities for your characters. There's no reason you couldn't do that in a Lower Deck style game, where maybe you've got an Epergosian officer who's like really good at operations, but they don't want to join Starfleet. They're there as an advisor, or they've joined that officer candidate, or not officer candidacy, but the the transfer program that Riker did and Kern did, where you serve some time on somebody else's ship and you gain more experience, and then you go back and share it with your species. But anyway, so we present 8 new species. We can just rattle through them here real quick. The Apragosians are a species that was originated in lower decks, and we thought that would be a cool species to add in. And they're the ones who were really good with numbers. It was the episode The Strange Energies, where Commander Ransom gets all the superpowers. He's the floating head in space. All the shenanigans happen. But anyways, we thought that would be a cool species. We've got the cetaceans. So of course, in Next Generation, they talk about the deck of the Enterprise D has dolphins on board that are helping with navigation. And of course, in lower decks, we meet 2 of the cetaceans on the ship, Kamolu and what's the other one's name? Matt, I think. Matt and Kamolu. I think those are the 2 cetaceans on the show. And so it's like, why not? Why not play a beluga whale or a cetacean on the show? Why not? It's Star Trek. Anything is possible, right? And I think that's the advantage of an RPG, is that we are limited only by our imagination. I mean, of course, in the case of the book, we're limited to some extent by what we can draw or what we can tell an artist to draw. But like you and your group at the game table, you can come up with literally anything you want. If you want to, I mean, one of the novels, the Titan series, the chief medical officer is a raptor, right? Basically, the doctor, I don't remember his name off the top of my head, but he's basically a raptor, walking around the ship eating raw meat for lunch or whatever, but being a doctor. And you're like, oh yeah, it's science fiction. It's anything is possible, right? So cetaceans, you want to play a cetacean officer? Absolutely, you can do it. We got clickets. Clickets are a species that were introduced in lower decks as well. And we thought that'd be really just a fun, interesting, different kind of character to play, like this, bipedal insectoid kind of thing. We haven't really seen a lot of that, except maybe with the Xindi, or the Osnalis maybe on Discovery. So we want to do something different there. We've got the exocomps. The exocomps made an appearance, actually were introduced in the Next Generation in one episode that, was middling, but the exocomps really appealed to Mike McMahon and his team, apparently, because they brought Peanut Hamster into the series. And boy, I'll tell you, if you've watched season 3, they took Peanut Hamster in some really different directions I was not seeing happening. But if you want to play an exocomp, there's some really cool possibilities there. So we added exocomp as a playable character species because, why not, right? It's again, science fiction. It's Star Trek. It's science fiction. Sentient robots, totally believable. Let's do it. So hopefully, and I can't wait to start hearing the campaigns and the stories that start coming around with exocomp player characters. In fact, I'm really curious to see if somebody decides to play like the first exocomp captain in Starfleet. I just want to know what that story looks like, because I think it would be amazing. We brought the Gorn in. Now, of course, this book was developed before season 1 of Strange New Worlds came out. And we don't have the license to Strange New Worlds, so we can't use the Strange New Worlds version of Gorn. And I'm not quite sure where they're going with that yet, but it sounds like we're going to find out pretty soon in the series. But so this is like the original series Gorn, and then the Gorn that we see in Lower Decks. Because of course, there's a couple episodes with the Gorn in Lower Decks. There's a Gorn wedding and some other stuff. So if you want to play a Gorn, absolutely. Here's the stuff you need to do that. Whether it's an original series flavor or a Lower Decks flavor, whatever you decide that on your own. We bring in the Kaelon. The Kaelon were introduced in Next Generation. Great episode with David Ogden Stiers playing Timothy. Great episode. But Kaelon are presented, I think, mostly in the background in Lower Decks and a few officers. But we just thought that'd be a really cool species to add in with some interesting, talents and abilities, and just a new option. And it's one of the next gen traditional. Humanoid species with different makeup on their forehead, kind of thing going on. But that's just where the makeup budget was at the time, right? So you can get creative with that if you want. We got Pakleds, of course, because Pakleds are the hotness in Lower Decks. And you want to play a Pakled officer who somehow supports Starfleet, or maybe not. Maybe you're playing a Pakled campaign. You give the options there. And then we wrap it up with the Temerians. The Temerians from the great episode Darmok from Next Generation, played by the late great Paul Winfield. And then of course there's a Kaelon character on Lower Decks as well, and Kayshawn. Lieutenant Cation. He gets turned into a puppet briefly in one episode, and then he gets better. But anyway, so the Temerians, Pakleds, Kalon, Gorn, Exocomps, Clickets, Cetaceans, and Apergosians. This is 8 species that are wildly different from each other, and I think these eight species together in this one book just really opens up the possibilities of what kind of characters you can have on a ship or in your campaign at any given moment, even including all the 50 or 60 other species that we've already got in the game in all of our other supplements. Adding these 8, I think, really just exponentially expands the possibilities that you can bring to your game table. And I have not even thought about all the possible permutations of character possibilities all kind of like combining together. Like, I don't know, maybe you've got an Exocomp and a X-Borg, an XB, X-Borg on the crew. Maybe you've got a Cetacean with cybernetic enhancements. I don't know. There's just so much possibilities here. Anyway, so hopefully these 8 species will just give players huge new options of what they can play and what they can explore in the game. Especially because some of these are like really science fiction-y, right? Like the Cetaceans, the Clickets, the Gorn, and the Exocomps, right? That's really getting into true science fiction territory of like, okay, you're playing a sentient robot that can float anti-grav and has a mini replicator on its front that can replicate any tool it needs to do its job. So like that's super cool science fiction right there, even if it's not Star Trek, right? I mean, there's plenty of other games that would fit in nicely, I think. So I'm just again, these are tools that were thrown at you, and I just can't wait to see what players do with all this stuff. And then we wrap up the chapter. Again, we're still talking about chapter 5 here. We wrap up the chapter with some new tools and weapons. All of these are drawn right off of Lower Decks. Of course, Lower Decks also having referenced the original series and the animated series, and even referencing the Star Trek meta, right? So like the totality of Star Trek. And the main thing I'm pointing at here is the if you've been a fan of Star Trek long enough, you might remember the Spock helmet, the white helmet with the chin strap and the red light on the top that had absolutely nothing to do with Star Trek. But some company out there said, hey, we're going to market this as a Spock helmet and make a little bit of money off that Star Trek license. And somehow they found a way to fit it into Lower Decks in a serious format. And the moment that happened, we're like, it's canon now. We're putting it in the game. It's in the game somehow. We're going to do it. So we actually found Aaron Palea did the writers for all the technology, and he found a way to fit the Starfleet helmet in here, and made a whole name out of it, and gave it capabilities and provided explanations for the beacon and all that stuff. The tricorder with the purple stripe. There's actually a scientific reason that purple stripe exists. It's not just aesthetic. So we created a reason to have that in the show. And then like that episode with the collector, who had all the weird random stuff in their collection. We dropped some of that stuff in here too, including a giant Vulcan femur bone. Those of you who've watched the animated series will understand where a giant Vulcan femur bone probably came from. And we threw it in here because it's a little whimsical and it's a little bit funny because that's the Lower Decks tone and spirit. And so, this book was an opportunity for us to get a little silly, still staying within the Star Trek kind of, frame of mind, but still being goofy because that's exactly what we see on Lower Decks there. They can push the boundaries of things a little bit. So we did that too. And hopefully folks will appreciate some of the Easter eggs and in jokes and little subtle humor bits that we dropped in here and there. So we'll see. But anyway, so that's chapter 5 is new species, which is a big chunk of the chapter, and then some new weapons and some new technology that you can use for your group to play with.
So what can you tell us about chapter 6, Gamemastering?
Yeah, absolutely. So chapter 6, we talked about this a little bit through this episode. And in fact, you alluded to it at one point. You were talking about like how to bring in that Lower Decks kind of fun, irreverent feel to your game, and to bring in that humor, right? So like certainly a lot of people, especially I think younger fans coming into the series who have not been around for the 55 years worth of stuff behind us, right? Probably see some elements of Star Trek as very, very, very serious, very heavy, very very tone-ish, where it's like, okay, Picard, Jesus, those 3 seasons were pretty heavy, right? There were some light moments, but overall that tone was pretty dark. I mean, even darker in some cases than DS9 had its darkness. there was some mature stuff going on in Picard, which is great because I think that really shows you how Star Trek as a science fiction storytelling property, like you can do anything with it. Like any genre of story that you want to tell, you can find it in Star Trek. And I think what Lower Decks does has really taken that humor dial and turned it up to 11, right? Like where certainly a lot of episodes in Star Trek's history have been funny, like I think of The Trouble with Tribbles, Trials and Tribulations. Plenty of, I mean, I don't have them all in my head, but there are a lot of very funny, silly episodes out there for Star Trek. And Lower Decks, really is reverential, self-reverential in some cases, but really just gives you the opportunity to have fun with the setting in a different way that some of the other series don't do quite as often, because they're really striving for more of a balance, whereas Lower Decks is really more focused on the humor consistently, day in and day out. So we this was an opportunity for us to play a little bit more than what we normally do, where most of the Star Trek Adventures books are fairly even serious-ish, presenting canon. Hopefully they're not boring. I mean, I sure hope they're not boring. But the Lower Decks book gave us a chance to play a little bit and be a little goofy and have a little bit of fun. And Chapter 6 is really aimed at the game master. Of course, players might get some benefit out of this just by reading it. But really talking to game masters about like how do you run a game that is, not to say that it's funny, because I think it's really hard to teach being funny, right? I think forced humor never works because it's forced, right? Like you can't force yourself to be funny because it doesn't come off well. And as I've told my writers time and time again, like humor is subjective. What you think is funny is going to land flat for somebody else. So we need to find that middle ground. And what we do in here is we really just throw a lot of writing tools at you. Like, I mean, really, you could take this game mastering chapter right out of this book and apply it to any game, any fiction writing, any script writing, screenwriting, like whatever kind of writing you're doing. If you want to think about how to tell funny science fiction stories, there's a lot of advice in this book that I think would port over very nicely. And one of the big things is just talking about tropes, right? Like a lot of people don't like to say tropes are a good thing, but tropes are what makes genres, right? Like there's a whole website out there called TV tropes that you can go and they say, there's very specific tropes that you hit to create a thriller series or a humor series or a sitcom or something. Like there are specific tropes that you hit because that's what the audience has come to expect. And if you're not hitting those tropes, then something's off, and people will notice that, and they're like, "Oh, this is what is this series? Is it a funny sitcom, or is it a serious comedy drama? Like what is this?" And if you're not hitting the tropes right, and you're not hitting the right kind of storytelling beats, you're going to lose your audience. And in the case of Star Trek, then if you're going for that kind of Lower Decks kind of funny frame, like hitting the tropes appropriately and then adding the right nuances to it will help. And then hopefully you got a good chemistry at your game table with your group of players who will buy into that. And again, we talked about session 0 earlier in the episode. Have that session 1 with your group, get a feel for like where are they willing to go on the humor scale, right? Do they want to go, full bore, Rick and Morty, South Park, offend everybody, blood and gore, but it's all comedy and it's all cartoonish anyway, so let's have fun? Or do they want to come down on that scale somewhere? Like try to find that balance point where everybody's comfortable and a little bit, if they're willing to push a little bit one way or the other, and then play into those tropes. And then, use some of the advice in here. And in the game, I think we offered a lot of writing advice in the Game Master Guide too, and it could work in here. Talking about the tropes, talking about especially Star Trek tropes. And in this case, I'm talking about Star Trek does a great job of presenting amazing technologies that help the characters, and that can be a problem for writers sometimes because they're like, well, they're in a problem, why wouldn't they just beam away? Okay, so now there's a trope, and one of the tropes is, okay, you got this amazing technology, we're going to find a way to break that technology so that you have to find another way to solve the problem. So you can't use the transporter as a crutch, you can't use the deflector shield as a crutch, you can't use the technobabble whatever as a crutch. You've got to find some other way around it. And finding a way around the technology that they created has become a Star Trek trope, right? Because that is something inherent to the series that you see all the time. It's like they create this amazing science fiction setting with this amazing technology, and time and again, the writers are having to write around that because they want good drama for the characters, and they want the characters to get into dramatic situations. And I see the same problem on television and in novels, where if you read novels that are old enough, you'll read it and you'll think, gosh, if these characters only had a cell phone, like the whole second half of the book completely falls apart, right? Because they, it's like, oh, if they'd only been able to contact somebody, they could have resolved the situation in 10 minutes. But the technology wasn't available back then, or they found a way to subvert it, or they're out of cell phone range, or they don't have a dime for the phone booth, or whatever the reason is. Writers are always finding ways to write around the tools that the characters have. And so that's a trope that you can play with. And we talk about some of the different tropes and some of the different technologies that are available in Star Trek and how to write around them, but also how to add a humorous kind of spin to that. Again, we're not teaching anybody to be funny. There's no way to. Me personally, I don't think there's a way to teach somebody to be funnier. You can offer some advice, but you just got to work at it, right? You got to practice. You got to learn how people work and how people think, and then just come up with outlandish situations, and then just see what happens, right? But anyways, there's just a ton of advice in this chapter about tropes, about good writing practices, how to use tropes. We also talk a lot about getting your players engaged. I think that's a big piece of having fun at the game table, and I think and this is certainly not unique to me. Like, I think not everybody, but a lot of people have experienced this, where if you're playing Dungeons and Dragons, or you're playing whatever fantasy RPG of your choice is, I think it's almost inevitable that the Monty Python quotes are going to start coming in. The Holy Grail, the Life of Brian, all that stuff that's been around in the RPG meta for decades now. It's just inevitable that stuff's going to come out and pepper your game with fun, silly stuff, right? And I think, in my opinion, Lower Decks is kind of the Monty Python of Star Trek, where like the Lower Decks series is so quotable, so memeable. There's so many memes and animated GIFs out there for Lower Decks that, like, any conversation you're having, there's probably a Lower Decks GIF that you can drop into the conversation and it'll work. Because that's just how the comedy works. It's so broad in some cases that it's applicable to almost any situation. And that's really where I think Monty Python has gotten to be, where it's just so goofy and it's so universally silly that you can pull chunks of it out and apply it to anything to make it funny and to really color your fantasy RPGs or whatever other RPGs you're running. And I think Lower Decks is doing that for Star Trek, either to its benefit or to its detriment. It's up to each individual. But a big piece of that is getting your players engaged. Like, if your players are into it and they're having fun and they're throwing the quotes back and forth and they're getting goofy and they're having silly, not only are they having fun, but they're probably more engaged in the game. And that might open up the possibilities of some great role-playing opportunities at your table, whether they're super dramatic or they're super silly or they're somewhere in the middle, whatever. The fact that they're engaged and they're leaning forward and they're getting into it, and maybe they're not just sitting back waiting for the next thing to happen, or they're waiting for their character moment to come up so they can do something. They're actually engaged with each other. They're having fun. We offer some advice on how to do that, or how to help do that. Adding comedy. Again, we talked about that humor dial a little bit, right? Like, hopefully you're getting your buy-in from your players as to like how far you're willing to go or when to scale it back. Maybe you're playing a game either at the game table or you're playing it virtually. Just a reminder on picking up the cues, like being an active listener. If you're the game master, if you're watching people play and you're seeing nonverbal cues, or you're seeing facial expressions, or you see somebody pulling back, or you see someone coming in, you can kind of read the room a little bit and play with it. Harder to do online in some cases, especially if you're not on video. Like if you're on audio only platform and you're just hearing tone, it's harder. I mean, you can still do it to some extent, but it's harder to catch tone when you're not visually seeing somebody, right? In my experience. Like if you're at the game table physically and you're 2 feet away from somebody, you're getting the visual cues, you're getting the nonverbal signals, and they're gesturing and they're doing things in character, or they're maybe they're sitting back and they're retreating because something offensive has happened in the game. They don't want to talk about it, but they're clearly withdrawing, and you need to figure out what can I do to take a break here. Let's pause. Let's talk about what happened, or maybe we redirect and try to get things back on course, whatever. Anyway, so we talk about some of that, just like that good player to player, player to game master kind of relationship building, in terms of just having fun, because like ultimately the point of the game is to have fun with your friends and tell cool Star Trek stories. And if something's getting in the way of that, then maybe you need to reel in maybe your humor is going too far. Like maybe you're getting into that kind of weird badgy thing where it's funny, but it's also kind of got a malicious angle to it, and maybe you didn't intend that to happen on it, and maybe some of the other players are getting into it, and maybe a couple of your players are like, "Whoa, we're going too far here. Let's pull it back a little bit here." So it's just finding that balance point. So we offer some advice on that. Again, not dictating how you should or shouldn't play the game. We're just offering tools. We ultimately, once these books get out there, it's up to the individual groups to do whatever the heck you want with it. We're not going to come to your house and tell you that you're doing it wrong, because there is no wrong way to do it. It's whatever you want it to be. And then we wrap it up, and we talk a little bit about planning out story arcs, and talking about different plot components like foreshadowing and balancing action with inaction, and ideas on outlining stories. This is really getting into the weeds on like writing, storytelling, being a good game master. Not necessarily being a good game master, but just being a game master, being thoughtful about like how am I going to structure this story in such a way that I can keep the narrative going, but still be open to all the feedback that the players are going to give you, right? Because like it's inevitable that the players are going to go left when you expect them to go right, and ideally, as a game master, you're flexible enough to go with them, as opposed to trying to put them back on the rails and run the story. Now, we've tried to make a lot of our missions and mission briefs and stuff pretty flexible, so that you don't feel like you're on a railroad. Like historically, I think some modules out there for other games are very like some of the old traditional computer games, right, where you could see the walls and you couldn't get past the walls, and like you were on the tracks, and like there's only so many things you could do in the game, and like you couldn't go out of those boundaries. And I think certainly there's a lot of game modules out there for all different companies, and in fact, I'm sure some of the Star Trek adventures, some of those earlier adventures probably feel like they're very constrained. But acknowledging that any three groups are going to run any given pre-packaged adventure completely differently. There's still basic things that a game master can think about as they're structuring their story, planning out their story, their outline. What kind of conflicts do they want to get in there? What do they want the players to experience, even if the players don't necessarily go from point A to point B to point C? Maybe they go A to C to B, or they go to B to C to A. Like whatever order they do them in, they're still having a great narrative experience that they're collaboratively doing with you. So just again, just a ton of advice for the game master to think about, to play with. Tools for the toolbox. As a writer, a fiction writer, over the years, I've talked to a lot of writers. I read a lot of writing books. I read a lot of RPG books. And inevitably, there's always tools I can grab from other people and throw into my toolbox. Sometimes I'll never use them. Maybe I'll use them once or twice, but they're there, right? And they're tools. They're things that I can do to expand my ability to tell a story, either just by writing a fiction story or by playing collaboratively with my group. And hopefully we're paying that forward and just presenting more tools in here. To give game masters and players just more options. Like maybe this is something you didn't think about. Like maybe you want to try some cliffhangers. Here's some ideas on how to use a cliffhanger. Maybe you want to get better at creating twist endings to your scenes. Like you want to finish a scene, but you want to have some sort of little twist that'll give you some forward momentum into the next scene or something. There's techniques and ways that you can do that as a storyteller and as a game master and as a player that can help that out, right? Again, the writers out there will be familiar with this kind of stuff, but if you're not familiar with it, then maybe there's something new in here to play with. And again, because this is lower decks and we decided to have some fun with it and drop in some random tables, We do drop in a few random tables here and there, just to help percolate the ideas and to start sparking off some ideas. So where, like, if you're rolling on a random table, maybe you don't like your result, but you can look at the one above and the one below, and maybe there's something better in the table that you can use instead. Or maybe you'll just happen to glance at something and say, oh, that's a good idea, but I want to twist it this way, and then you twist it a different way and make it applicable to your game, and you're off and running. So I'm really, again, these are all tools, and I'm probably boring the audience by telling you, look, we're just throwing a lot of tools at you here, but really, this is what it is. And I think this is like some of the best RPG books I've ever read over the long years of being a gamer and a game master. Like, the ones that were just full of tools were the ones that were most beneficial to me, because it was like, oh, this is cool stuff that I can add either to this game or to a completely different game, right? Like I remember, oh gosh, what was it? One of the DM guides, like it might have been 3.5 edition or maybe 4th edition. One of the ones where they had like the DM Guide 2 and the DM Guide 3. It's like they really expanded, and there's like just so many random tools. I was reading one of them, and I was like, well, I'm not running D&D much these days, but I'm running, Marvel superheroes. But this advice in this book would totally port over to start, so I'm going to use it. So I pulled that tool out of D&D and I dropped it into a superheroes campaign, and it worked great. I don't remember the exact example, but I just like these good tools are universal to some extent, and it'll help you do a better Star Trek game, but it'll also help you be a better storyteller, and that'll inform all your RPGs, no matter what you're playing. Anyway, that's the hope anyway, right? I certainly don't assume that's going to happen, but I certainly hope that'll happen.
I can't think of anyone that would hate the idea of random charts. Like there's actually certain role-playing games that are just all about random charts. But I think that's really great to have, because sometimes as long as I play, even I get stuck on something, and I just like, all right, I need something random in, so I could just kind of like get my wheels turning again. So it's really great that that's available. But chapter 7, Starships, Starbases, and Vehicles. All right, I'm curious, what's in here? What do you have extra more?
Yeah, sure thing. So for those that are familiar with the Star Trek Adventures line, whether it's the core book or especially the Utopia Planitia book, right? We presented we present a lot of space frames for you to use to help create your group's ship. Like, if you want a particular ship, you grab a space frame, you grab a mission profile, put them together, grab some talents, and then you're off and running with your ship, tailored to what you want it to be. Because like the ship is almost itself, right? We've seen that time and time again on the series. The Enterprise is easily as important of a character as Kirk or Spock or Scotty or whatever, or Picard or Data or whatever series you're watching, or Voyager's just as important of a character. And so we present some new space frames in this book just to expand the possibilities. Of course, at the time we were developing Utopia Planitia, we didn't have the license to Lower Decks yet. So like the Lower Decks space frames, we wanted to add in the Utopia Planitia, but the timing just didn't quite work out. We were just off a little bit. So we were like, okay, fine, we'll just save them for the Lower Decks book. Once we finally got the license to Lower Deck. So the Lower Decks presented some new space frames. They had the California, the Obana, the Parliament, and a couple other ones. And we put them all in here. So there's 7 space frames in this book. Now, one of them is not new. The Luna class, we've already done the Luna class. It was in the Command Source book, and then slightly revised for the Utopia Planitia book. But I really thought hard about it, and I was like, you know what? The Titan played such a key role in Lower Decks in the season 1 finale, and then a little bit in season 2, that I thought, and this is where I had to put the project manager hat on and say, okay, look, is there a possibility that somebody might come into the game and just want to do Lower Decks? Maybe they won't buy the Utopia Planitia book. Maybe they'll just buy the core book, and they'll want the Lower Decks book, and then they'll have those 2 books. Would they be missing out if they didn't have the Luna class? Maybe, because the Luna class played a key role in Lower Decks. That's the only place we've really seen it other than in the novels. And I was like, I think we should put it in here because it was such a key focus of Lower Decks. So there's a certain component of the fan base that'll probably say, hey, why are you duplicating content? That sucks. I've already paid for this content. And I'm like, well, yeah, you did, but you know what? It's 2 pages. It's 2 pages out of 240, so give me a break. Those 2 pages, they're not for you, right? They're for the players who didn't buy Utopia Planitia, they just want the lower decks experience, maybe this is for them. So, you got to make choices sometimes, right? So we got the California class, we got the Luna, we got the Osler, of course, that episode with the Division 14. We see the Osler class, so we thought, oh, that's a cool looking ship. Let's throw it in there. So we added that. We added the Obana, the Parliament. Those are two new Starfleet classes that are introduced in lower decks. That in that 2380s post Dominion War kind of frame, these are two awesome space frames that maybe you want to run a whole campaign off of one of these, right? I think the Obana class is kind of the spiritual successor to the Excelsior, and the Excelsiors are like have been shown as the workhorses of Starfleet for 100+ years. And if you think about like lower decks, like if you're looking at that 2380 to 2399 time frame between End of Nemesis and Start of Picard, that's 20 years of gaming potential, right? You could run countless campaigns in that 20-year time frame without even butting into the events of Picard or dealing with the after effects of the Dominion War and Nemesis. You could run a whole deep space exploration campaign on a Parliament class or an Obana class, and it would totally fit, right? It would be totally awesome. So there's just some possibilities there. So we put those in there. There's a Vulcan space frame in here, the big Vulcan ship with the ring, the glowing ring around it. We thought that was a really cool look, and because it played a key role in some of the episodes, we thought we'd add that in. I think there's not enough non-Starfleet space frames in the game, so we're trying to fill that in a little bit. So we brought that one in, and then in a couple episodes, like kind of in the background, there's this new class of ship that's not specifically Starfleet, but we called it the Ganassia class. And Aaron Paulier, who wrote all these up, he decided that was a group project between the Andorians and the Tellarites. Put their heads together, came up with a compromised class of ship. Because you see it, there's an episode where you see two of them in the background, and they look very different. Like you can see they're the same class, but they've got like different color and different features and stuff. And he was like, yeah, so let's do it. So one's Andorian, one's Tellarite. They're similar, they got different capabilities, and there's just different ways of doing stuff with them. So I think adding in some Starfleet ships and this mixed Andorian Tellarite ship, and then the Vulcan ship, I think we're giving players and game masters again, some additional tools to just expand the possibilities of what kind of ships are out there to play with and to run a campaign on if you want to. And then beyond the space frames, lower decks presents a whole bunch of different ships, like hero ships. So we put a couple of those in here, like the Keto and the Macduff, the Warp Shuttle, the Vulcan Warp Shuttle, and a couple of new stations. We got the Watchtower class Starbase and the Douglas type Starbase. So can't hurt to have a few new Starbases in there, especially since we see them on the show. We figured, why not put some stats together and present them? Because I think either one of those could be really good bases of operations for a campaign too. Out there on the frontier, Starfleet, plunks a starbase down on a new planet or a planetoid or something, and then that can be a launching base for new stories and new adventures, similar to Shackleton, where you've got the starbase and you can go off and do adventures. This is the same idea, just some new options there for ships. That's the Federation anyway. We also have subchapters for the Pack-Leds. Of course, the Pack-Leds are a really big focus of the series. So we try to give you lots of options for Pack-Led ships. I think we presented a different ship for each scale. So, depending on what kind of game you're running, if you have like a scale 3 Federation ship, there's enough Pack-Led ships in here that can either challenge you or almost be a challenge or could overwhelm you, like depending on how much you want to go into the weeds on that. We also provide some construction rules on Pack-Led ships, because it's, the clump ships are like kit bashes of all kinds of different polity technology. So we gave you some ideas on like building your own clump ship, like what goes into that, what to think about. It's similar in some respects to the Frankenstein fleet sidebar that we put into the Gamma Quadrant book, where if you want to do like a kit bash Federation ship, here's some ideas on how to do that. Same idea here, but now you're building a Pack-Led clump ship, and you're pulling, stuff from Cardassian ships or Klingon ships and Federation ships, and somehow making it all work. Like, what's mechanically, how does that work in the game, and what kind of impacts could that have to your power distribution or your complications or just other stuff like that. So, just throwing some cool ideas in there. Of course, you could port it over to a different species if you want to. It doesn't have to be Pack-Leds. Certainly, there's probably other species out there who combine technologies into different ways. I think the Kazon and maybe even the Ferengi sometimes, like I think we've seen evidence that they pull different technologies together, and who knows what kind of things can happen when you put different pieces together and make them do different things. And again, just a wealth of other starships. Again, we talked about how Lower Decks packs a lot of new stuff into their episodes, and so some of those different new cultures and new civilizations, they got their own ships. So we threw in some other options here as well. And then we wrap up the chapter with ground vehicles. I think this is the first time we've really been able in the Star Trek Adventures line to bring in ground vehicles, because really you don't see that many ground vehicles in the different series, except for maybe the Argo in Insurrection, Insurrection, no, Nemesis. And it's like, yeah, why not throw in some ground vehicles? They're not really all that different from shuttles, right? They're just different means of transportation. So we throw a couple of those in there just to mix things up a bit, make it interesting. And that's chapter 8. Yeah, a lot of new vehicles and toys to play with.
And chapter 8 deals with allies and adversaries. So is it mostly NPCs? What does this chapter consist of exactly?
Yeah, so if you're familiar with our other books, we always try to include a chapter full of NPCs. These are all for game masters to throw out their players, whether it's major, minor, or notable species and characters. If you need like some mooks to throw at them, or you need some powerful adversaries to throw at them, here's a bunch of options. We cover a lot of the characters that were in Lower Decks, like Ensign Fletcher, Captain Ramsey, Captain Gomez. We tried to hit some of the highlights of the really interesting characters, at least interesting to us anyway, that could be present in your campaigns, or that you could fold into your campaigns, or that you could use as basis for your own characters, right? I mean, it'd be pretty easy just to switch the names and maybe switch out a talent or a focus or a value or something, and you got a whole new character. But a lot of the legwork has been done for you because they're all statted up and have all the talents and stuff, right? So just a wealth of Starfleet NPCs in here that you can play with. And then Klingons, Pakleds, and then a mix of other species that you've seen in the show. One thing we did do in here that I thought was kind of fun is, if you harken back to the core rule book, in the core rule book, of course, we presented 8 playable character species, but in the back of the book, if you were paying attention, and not you, Manny, but just the general listening audience, if you were paying attention in the back of the book when we present the NPCs, the Romulans, the Klingons, the Ferengi, the Borg, the Vorta, and the Jem'Hadar, there may have been a couple more, each had a sidebar of some basic information about the species, some information about their species trait, their 3 attribute modifiers, and just a little bit of information about that species. So it was enough information was there that if you wanted to play a player character of that species, you had the key tools you needed. And then if you read the NPCs of that species, you would understand what the 2 species talents were if you were paying attention and connecting the dots. And we do the same thing in this chapter, where in addition to the 8 species that we present in chapter 5, we also present 3 more species in chapter 8 that provide just enough information that if you want to play a player character of that species, there's enough information there. So we've got the Kzinti, and what were the other ones? The Anabaj. Anabaj are a Lower Decks unique presented species, and there was one other one. What the heck's the other one? Oh, the Hysperians. Those are the ones on the Monavine that are like the Ren Fair themed species, which I love. I just loved them. So much fun with those. So hopefully folks have fun with those. And there's some Easter eggs. Like if you look at the Hesperian NPC write-ups, those of you who are familiar with a very certain fantasy RPG, the world's most popular fantasy RPG out there, you'll see some references to things in the stat blocks. So hopefully folks will catch those and enjoy those little Easter eggs that we dripped in there. So anyway, so technically this book presents 11 new species that you can add to your game as playable character species. 3 of them you have to do just a little bit of work just by looking at the NPCs and figuring out the talents. Although to be honest with you, at this point, after 7 years, there are so many talents in this game available to you as a player character that it should be pretty easy to take any 2 that you want and reskin them and drop them right into the game. to be Hesperian talents or to be Anabosh talents or to be Kzinti talents. I think even the core book itself, I think Nathan Dowdell did a great job in that core rule book to flat out say, if the talent name doesn't fit your character concept, change the name, because it's super flexible. Like if like if the talent is I don't even have a good example off the top of my head. It's getting late. But like if the talent is cleaving, powerful punch or something, and you don't like that concept, you want to theme it to your character species or something else, then just change the name. No one's going to stop you. Just as long as your game master understands that talent is, talent X from the XYZ core book or whatever, then they'll at least understand it. But it's just skin it to whatever you want it to be and make it fit your character. There's no reason not to do that. And I think for these character species that don't have talents specifically called out in the stat blocks or in the sidebar, just pick one. Like there's got to be, oh God, I haven't even looked at the list lately. There's probably like 150 talents in the game at this point, if not more. And it should be a pretty easy lift to just grab one and reskin it and drop it right in, and no one's gonna be any the wiser. Hopefully, anyway. Don't feel hidebound to what's on print. Be willing to change it if you want to. So have fun with it. Let's see, is there anything else in this chapter? Oh yeah, and we wrap up the chapter with a bunch of creatures. I mean, obviously these are NPCs, but there's some significant adversaries that pop up in the series that cause problems for the main characters. So we got like Agamus and Armus, the Swarm of Eels, the Mugatu, the Salt Vampire, a couple other ones. The dog, of course, we had to have the dog in here because that's Tendy's great creation, and of course, it'd be fun to put the dog in here. So hopefully, between the subchapter on creating your own creatures and then the creatures that we present in this chapter, hopefully that's enough new beasties that if the game master needs to surprise their player characters or just throw something new and different at them, there's enough tools in here that you can do that.
Last but not least, chapter 9, the mini campaign. I see it looks like 4 adventures in this chapter. Without spoiling it, what can you say about them?
Yeah, so like in some of our other products, like the Discovery Campaign Guide, we present this is actually a 3-part mini campaign. So we've got it's 3 short episodes that are thematically linked loosely, and could be run in order, but they don't have to be run in order. But they're all, without giving anything away, they're all focused on the Lower Deck experience. So if you're playing a Lower Decks campaign, any 3 of these episodes could just be dropped right into your campaign as either one-shots or standalones, or even as sparks for a longer story arc or something. There's a lot of meat here that you can play with. And in fact, with these 3 short episodes that are loosely linked or not loosely linked, depending on how you want to run it, the chapter on game mastering, we forgot to mention that there's actually 12 mission briefs in that chapter. So that you've actually got 15 episodes in this book, basically in one format or another, not counting all the plot hooks that are scattered throughout the book. So I think if you wanted to run just a Lower Decks campaign, and all you buy is this book and you pair it up with the core rule book of your choice, you've got probably a year worth of gaming there, depending on your group, right? Like I know some groups run stuff faster than others, but if you're the typical group, in my experience at least, and you're playing once a month, this is 15 episodes of potential stuff, just running it right out of the book, like without bringing your own creativity into it necessarily. So hopefully just a lot of story in here to play with. We had fun with the mini campaign. The only thing I'll say is that there's one of the 3 parts, or I guess one of the 3 episodes in the mini campaign, is thematically adjacent to one of the episodes of Lower Decks, and that was unintentional. I think we were developing this book as season 3 was coming out, and there was one particular episode of season 3 that we were like, oh crap, people are gonna read or are gonna read the book next year and say we were inspired by that particular episode. And I'm just trying to say that's not really the point. I mean, it wasn't intentional because we actually wrote our manuscript before that episode came out. So you'll see the links though, but having seen the episode and having read this adventure, it's all from the same wellspring of creativity and ideas. So it totally fits Lower Decks, and it was confirmed because we actually saw it on the show. And I know I'm being vague, but like you'll get it once you read the book and you read the episode and the adventure, you'll be like, oh, they're talking about that episode. So anyway, that being said, again, three short adventures. Use them as much or as little as you want. Tear them apart, whatever. Lots of ideas here for you to play with. You could play them sequentially. You can play them out of order. You can play them just as separate standalones, whatever. Just hopefully a lot of fun to play with there. And that brings us to the end. You know, the index is index does its job. But boy, I tell you, man, we've spent what, an hour and a half, almost 2 hours here on this book. I feel bad because I thought we'd get through it a little bit quicker, but hopefully I've illustrated to the audience that there is way more in this book than just the Lower Decks TV series experience. Like, we tried to pack these 240 pages with just as much RPG material that we could possibly squeeze in here to help you and your game master and your fellow players run just really amazing Star Trek adventures, Star Trek stories, whether you're doing like the Lower Decks tone and feel of irreverent humor, or you're doing something a little more serious but informed by all that silly stuff, or if you're just doing something different, whether it's Starfleet, not Starfleet, you know, some other polity, whatever. I think there's enough material in here that'll keep you busy for a good long time, at least until the next book comes out, and then you'll have even more stuff to play with. I think personally, privately, well, not privately because I'm going to say it publicly, but I think we have released so much stuff on such a consistent basis that I wonder sometimes if a lot of players just haven't caught up yet, and they're still catching up to all the cool stuff that's been coming out. I think we're at a good cadence. I really don't know. I think I haven't heard anybody say stop or put the brakes on yet, because of course, you know, fans are rabid. They always want more, and inevitably we'll release something new and they'll say, well, that's great, what's next? And, or, you know, what's next? It's like, well, there's always something coming, but you just got to be patient. But hopefully in the meantime, you know, hopefully this big old honking book will satisfy you for a while, and hopefully there's lots of cool stuff in here to play with. So yeah, I hope this has been. I've had a lot of fun, Manny, and I hope you have too. I know a lot of this has just been listening to me go on about this book, but hopefully I've given a pretty good presentation of the totality of this thing.
Oh yes, and there's more. There's more to talk about too.
Yeah, there's so much more.
Well, I don't know. I don't know if our readers can. I don't know if 2 hour limit is too much they can do before they, no pun intended, space out.
Yeah, I hear you. There's a certain point of saturation, right? In fact, this is if you can indulge me with a stupid non sequitur. My family and I, this past weekend, we went to an ice cream festival here outside of DC, Washington DC, and my son, he's 7. He's learning about chemistry in school, and so we bought some cotton candy, and we were just hanging out under the shade of the trees, just relaxing. And we had a bottle of water, and we had his cotton candy, and he thought, oh, I'm really curious. I want to know what will happen to the cotton candy if I put it in the water. And so he did it, and of course it dissolved immediately, right? And I said, well, do you know what happens if you keep putting more and more cotton candy in there? He said, well, no. What happens? He said, at a certain point, the water will become so saturated that the cotton candy will not dissolve anymore, because there'll be too much sugar particles in the water that it just won't dissolve anymore. And he wasn't sure about that. He didn't believe me. But sure enough, he kept doing it. And after a certain point, the cotton candy stopped dissolving because the water was super saturated with cotton candy and sugar. So I think maybe, trying to make this horrible analogy come through here, is that we're saturating players and game masters with just tools and possibilities and opportunities here. So hopefully the gaming, you know, zeitgeist of Star Trek Adventures, hopefully you guys aren't saturated yet, because we're just dropping cool. Hopefully we're dropping cool stuff on you at such a volume, you know, density of stuff, that hopefully you guys aren't saturated yet. And again, like I said, I haven't heard anybody say I've had enough, or like I'm saturated. I can't take any more. I haven't heard that yet. You know, maybe they're talking about it privately, but maybe this is the book that'll tip them over to the point where they say, okay, we need a break. I don't know though, because we're still going full speed ahead. So we'll see what happens.
Well, I can't speak for the whole community, but I know for myself, more books, please. There's so much more to tap into. So, you know,
yeah.
But Jim, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us about this book. It looks fantastic. And again, our viewers, I'll put links in the description below. Thank you all for watching. Live long and prosper. Have a good night,
Yep.
everyone.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Manny. Appreciate it.